Every proper Egyptian temple cult needs a temple. And every proper Egyptian temple has a foundation deposit. Find out about foundation deposits and why this is such a problem for starting a new Egyptian temple cult on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. Now, this is the second episode of our new series, So You Want to Start a Proper Egyptian Temple Cult. And in this episode, we are going to talk about foundation deposits and why they are so tricky for those who want to start a new Egyptian-style temple cult. Okay, let's define what we mean by foundation deposit. All temples need a connection to the past, either through its piety or to present the fidelity of its worshippers to the gods. This legitimizes your temple. So you have to bury some expensive and important stuff under your temple as a sign to the gods that you're really serious about worshiping them. What can I say? The Egyptian gods are a tough crowd to please. These items buried beneath your temple are called foundation deposits because, as the name suggests, they are deposits of items underneath the foundation of your temple. Now, there are two kinds of foundation deposits that are important. The first kind is described as ritual or treasure items. Now, if your temple is a reconstruction of an existing temple, you would take ritual items from your old temple that were precious and bury them under your new temple. Egyptian cults do this to properly dispose of items that are no longer used. But this also not only buries the past, but also shows the gods tokens of your faithful service. So this helps to inaugurate your new temple. Now, an example of this kind of foundation deposit was found at the Old Kingdom Temple of Heracleopolis, which contained ritual items from Dynasty 0 to 2, including the famous Narmer palette and Scorpion mace head. But what if you aren't doing a reconstruction, but building a temple from scratch, and don't have any valuable old ritual items just lying around? Well, you still need to do a foundation deposit. In this case, you bury treasure instead. An example of this was done at the Temple of Montu at Toad. The so-called Toad treasure was 4 arsenic bronze boxes with wood liners that were filled with gold, silver, and lapis items. Now, you are not going to be able to find bronze boxes off the shelf, but you can get one custom made for about $1,000 a piece. Okay? So, let's assume that for your new temple, you're going to have to recreate the foundation deposit used at the Temple of Montu at Toad. Okay? So, your first expense is going to be 4 bronze chests. Total cost, $4,000. Now, among the 4 chests were 2 smaller chests that held silver items. Now, these silver items included silver ingots and small plates and chains, plus 153 silver cups, most of which were flattened and folded. Now, obviously, this is not an Egyptian technique, but some of the golden items complement the inventory as well, whereas the 2 larger chests contain fragments of raw lapis lazuli and thousands of carved pieces of the same material, namely beads, inlays, and cylinder seals. So then, let's begin with the lapis items. The toad treasure contained both unfinished lapis and strands of beads. Some of the beads were of fancy shapes like melons, snail shells, frogs, eagles, flies, and seated bulls, as well as amulets of falcons, uraeuses, seated apes, and jed pillars. There are also a few lapis scarabs. Now, the value of lapis at the time the treasure was buried was twice its weight in silver, or the same as the price of gold at the time. So the modern value of lapis is between $5 per gram for low grade material to $750 per gram for the best grades of lapis. Now, the weight of the lapis has not been determined from the toad treasure, but we can provide a lowball estimate of about 2 kilograms. And we're going to assume that the specialized lapidary work will be included in the price of the stone itself. And assuming a low to middle grade lapis about $25 per gram, the cost of the lapis you'll need for your foundation deposit will be about $50,000. Now, the silver items were a combination of small bowls, ingots, and rings. The price of silver at the time the Egyptians buried the toad treasure was about half the price of gold. However, thankfully, the price of silver has dropped over time because of developments in silver mining. The modern spot price of silver as of July 11th, 2024, according to the Kitco spot price, is about 99 cents per gram. Now, the silver items from the toad treasure weighed 8.87 kilograms. So the cost of the silver needed for your foundation deposit will be $8,781. Then there are the gold items, of which there were 6.98 kilograms. The modern spot price of gold as of July 11th, 2024, again according to Kitco, is $76.51 per gram. That means that the cost of the gold that you will need for your foundation deposit will be $534,040. So now, consider this that just for the treasure aspect of your foundation deposit, you will need essentially $600,000 for something that you're just going to bury underneath the floor of your temple. But hey, the gods want to know you're serious about worshiping them before they do you any favors. You didn't think the gods' love was free, did you? What do you think this is? Christianity? Think again. However, there is one other component you need for your foundation deposit. A rather difficult item to get, but it's needed for a proper Egyptian temple cult. And there's no delicate way of putting this. You will need a human sacrifice. Now, the following is for educational purposes only. Don't go out and kill someone. That is morally wrong and illegal. The purpose of this section is to show that it's impossible to create a proper Egyptian divine cult today that would please the gods of Egypt. So with that said, we have to sort of outline the whole sort of idea of human sacrifices within temples. Now, human sacrifices have been depicted on the walls of many Egyptian temples. These reliefs show prisoners with their hands and feet bound behind them and executed as a temple sacrifice. And for the longest time, these reliefs were thought to be similar to voice offerings. That is, something that was portrayed on the walls of their temples, but they didn't actually perform it in practice. However, at the Temple of Mut at Karnak, the excavators had the opportunity to examine beneath the paving stones of the temple. And beneath the floor of the Temple of Mut, a human male skeleton was found, quote, lying on his side, bound and trussed as a captive with his wrists behind his ankles, end quote. The man was clearly executed and buried beneath the foundation of the temple, as the reliefs suggest. And this comes from Mark Jansen's PhD dissertation, page 317. Now, what's interesting here about this particular instance is that it was found at the Temple of Mut. When the temple was founded by Thutmose III, Mut was a mother goddess that had no associations with violence or war deities. Now, later on, during the reign of Amenhotep III, statues of Sekhmet, a goddess known for violence, was brought into the precinct of Mut. However, at the time of the human sacrifice, Mut had no such associations. Far from it. She was the antithesis of a war deity. Mut was a nurturing maternal deity. This then speaks to the idea that human sacrifices were probably normative for Egyptian divine cults. So then, what does this mean for your proper Egyptian-style cult? Well, the gods demand what they demand, and how serious are you about restoring a proper Egyptian-style divine temple religion? You want to do this thing, you'll need a proper human sacrifice, preferably one that resulted from the spoils of war. So it has to be a young, strong, healthy human male. A slave might be acceptable, but it cannot be a volunteer. So anyone who is part of the temple cult is not permitted to volunteer to be a sacrifice. That leaves you with, unfortunately, few possibilities. Now again, this is for educational purposes only, but it does figure into the costs. So you will probably need a kidnapping kit of some kind, which includes duct tape, gloves, rope, garbage bags, disposable wipes, and a shovel. That'll probably set you back about $100. Your priests will gather to inaugurate the temple with the bound victim. The sacrifice will be performed, and the victim will be buried under the foundation stones of the temple. That will be the only time blood is shed inside the temple precinct itself. After this point, all bloodshed must take place in the slaughterhouse. You did remember to build that slaughterhouse, right? And no other blood can be shed or brought into the temple proper. You'll also need to bury that body so deep that nobody ever finds it. It does no good to perform a human sacrifice if the police find the body and take it away. Your sacrifice is a foundation deposit. It's supposed to be planted underneath the foundation of your temple and stay there. So you'll probably need to drill several large diameter wells. 6 might be a good number. Look, this is going to get expensive because you're trying to do a human sacrifice that the police will never find. Now is not the time to go cheap. The police will happily dig up one 300-foot well to find a body. But digging up 6 wells would be too expensive and troublesome and too risky. If they dig up 6 holes and find nothing, it looks bad for the police as a waste of public tax dollars. Now, the fact they won't bother won't prevent the police from pressing charges against you, but it might prevent them from retrieving the body. In all likelihood, they will still prosecute, but the prosecution will rely upon circumstantial evidence to build their case, which they can still convict you with. Make no mistake about that. So then, figuring in the costs of the well, each well will be about $15,000, as these are the most expensive kind of wells to make. So your well drilling costs will be $90,000. Then, you are going to need a large supply of concrete to fill those wells once the offering is deposited, and a contractor that will keep his mouth shut until the job is done. Fortunately, it is less expensive to fill a hole than to drill it. It costs about $1,500 per well, so figure about $9,000. Okay, now you are in a heap of trouble because murder is illegal in practically every country in the world. And it is a notoriously difficult crime to get away with. Not to mention, your busybody neighbors are going to get very suspicious of your midnight activities. The drilling, the robes, the chanting, and the filling. And they will probably call the police on you even if they have no idea what's happening on your property. Even if the police don't find the body, you will probably be the leading suspect. And you will have to defend yourself of a murder charge. You will, of course, need to lawyer up. Assuming none of your priests, your accomplices, confess by mistake, you will be in for a long and expensive trial. But knowing that you are a suspect, you hire a lawyer on retainer ahead of time. A legal retainer to represent multiple parties will be about $50,000. Now that is only going to be the beginning of the fees you will be forking out. Since there will be multiple people involved, you would be best to have everyone represented by the same legal firm. Now this will raise suspicions among the police to the extent that no other party will be considered as suspects. After all, you have the motive, the means, and the opportunity, plus you're acting suspiciously. All this is fair because you are indeed guilty. But having all the accused parties use the same legal firm will streamline the trial and keep everyone's story straight. You're also going to need to hire a public relations firm. The kind of public relations firms that represent evil companies like Enron or Monsanto. Because nothing will sit better with the public as when they hear, quote, "Our bird-headed god of war told us we needed a human sacrifice to make him happy," end quote. Oh yeah, the press will have a field day with that. Because you're trying to fight back negative press, this will be more expensive as these firms are doing triage. The cost for the service for a religious organization will be about $10,000 per month. Since most murder trials go from investigation to trial in under a year, figure that you'll be paying the PR firm for about 14 months. 12 to get you to trial, and 2 to deal with any of the residual aftermath following the trial. Total cost of your public relations firm, $140,000. Finally, you go to trial and you have your day in court. Regardless of the verdict, murder trials are expensive. If you are innocent and the case is simple, they can be as low as $100,000. But you aren't innocent. On the extreme end, murder trials can be as expensive as $12 million. We will assume the average cost of $300,000. So that's all the costs associated with doing the foundation deposits on a proper Egyptian divine temple. The total bill for the foundation deposits comes to $1,185,921. With the cost of the building itself, so far, the combined cost of your proper Egyptian divine cult is $4,800,921. The costs associated with the foundation deposit differ radically between what they were in ancient times versus what they are today. In ancient times, assuming the stability in gold pricing, the cost of silver and lapis was higher back then than they are today. During the late period, the ancient cost of the contents of the toad treasure would be somewhere around $954,000 in today's money. This is about 60% higher in the past than it would be to recreate that treasure today. However, back then, proper Egyptian divine cults were state-sponsored religions. The state provided much of the financing, the land, and even the human aspects. So, the ancient worshipper would not have been faced with the legal hurdles that exist today. The lack of government sponsorship makes starting a proper Egyptian divine cult impractical, if not impossible today. So anyway, I hope you learned something from this video. I hope you found that interesting. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.